Ladies and gentlemen, at some point or another, you've probably heard somewhere down the line that gun rights in America are under attack. Right? You've heard it. You know you've heard it, and you're wondering why you've heard it. And the reason why you've heard this is because, quite simply, quite effortlessly, um, they want to create a straw man, boogeyman effort approach here to scare you into thinking that the left wants to take your guns. This is not true, and that is easy enough for me to say. Why, however, is American culture so entrenched, so deeply entrenched in the idea of owning guns? Remember, your Second Amendment right allows you to own guns. We do not talk about self defense laws. We do not talk about the use of said guns. It's just the right to own guns. I'd like to point you to the fact that even if you own a gun legally, you can still be prosecuted for crimes with said gun, i.e., mass shooters. These are the people that you are defending when you talk about, oh my God, don't talk about my gun rights. I deserve to own guns, 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 guns. Not about education, not about transportation, not about housing, not about a cleaner, greener earth. It is simply about the fact that you want to be able to own something that can shoot bullets at a high velocity in case somehow a burglar enters your home. You talk about very specific cases. You talk about the right to own guns to overthrow a tyrannical government, the same government that you support when they support your Second Amendment rights. Right, right. So let's talk about why Americans are so obsessed with guns.
For centuries, but no nation has embraced the firearm as much as the United States. Of the 857 million civilian-owned guns in the world, Americans own nearly half of them. But what's behind our obsession with firearms?
As a crime reporter, I wanted to show how easy it is for the average American to buy a gun.
This is our colleague, Andy Campbell. In 2016...
Which is very easy, by the way. I don't understand why people think, oh, if you take guns away, you're taking them from law-abiding citizens. That means that the criminals will only have them. So, are you worried that, like, we're not taking guns away from criminals? Because criminals can legally own guns and commit crimes with them. Therefore, you are advocating for the group that you will become, which always bothered me as a spin to this argument, because it's strange to me that, like, I'm asking for, like, what I would want out of gun rights in America is a more strategic practice to where, like, people who clearly have bad intentions can't get guns easily. You keep talking about how criminals commit crimes with guns, and that's why law-abiding citizens need the guns. But you do realize that killing a person is bad regardless of the situation you're in. So when I think about people advocating for less gun rights, less regulation with guns, I always think in my head, then what is your purpose with wanting one? If you're not doing anything bad, then none of the gun registration and gun regulation laws will, like, hurt you in any way. But you keep saying, well, criminals will get them. Then why don't you do the thing criminals are doing if you want the guns so bad? Why is it that you keep thinking that gun regulation will hurt you because criminals don't care about laws when you're not a criminal yourself? Therefore, any type of regulation would not stunt you from owning a gun. Is it a certain type of gun? I don't think that matters in a situation, right? I don't think you're really walking around with a whole fucking, like, nice assault rifle thinking, like, yeah, I'm a normal person, I just carry an assault rifle. Having a gun, like, let's say there's a gun on this table, right? It being here means that if I accidentally knock it off and it goes off and it goes, like, up into the ceiling and shoots somebody, well, I owned it legally, I just made a mistake with it. The presence of the gun causes an uncertainty in its outcome. No matter how safe you are, no matter how... If 72 school-age middle schoolers, if 72 middle schoolers rush you with a gun, and you have a gun, and 72 middle schoolers rush you, the odds of you being able to beat off all 72 of them pounding on you, like just jumping all over you in a random cert, and then one takes your gun, like, you put yourself in that situation. The safety of gun ownership is not ladled on top of your rights as an American. It's the safety of thinking about just having the guns in presence causes issues. Like, I remember they used to say, well, to stop school shooters, we need to arm teachers with guns. So what happens if a kid doesn't like what a teacher says? So the teacher is like, all right, everybody's out for recess, the whole building's clear. I'm not gonna carry this around with me. I'm gonna leave it in the office, go get a drink. Kid sneaks in, grabs the gun, starts shooting up teachers. So the kid shoots up the teachers, therefore the teachers are going to shoot at the kid. You've got a gunfight on your hands. How about you solve the inequalities or the mental health issues? Right, yo, like I've seen teachers like literally go hand in hand with fucking kids. Like, I've been there. I've been there. Like, not me personally throwing hands with a teacher, but I've seen like shoving matches happen. Like, don't touch me. Don't touch me. Yo, like, oh my God, somebody wilding out on the bus. Clap, 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 clap. Like, our entire idea of solving crime issues is to kill the people kill the criminals. And what I'm saying to you is okay, that's not racist, right? Like, if you want to have a nuanced conversation on it, that's not racist. Everybody should be allowed to have a gun. But like, you view a black man with a gun as more dangerous than a white man with a gun because your mind jumps to the stereotypes and the racial biases that you have on what type of person that person is to even want to carry a gun in the first place. I know people in Brooklyn right now carrying guns. They might be illegal to carry them, but it's your right as an American to have one, right? Like, I don't understand the duality here.
Andy traveled to Orlando after the Pulse nightclub shooting,
which was at the time one of the worst shootings in American history,
to see how easily he could buy a gun. And not just any gun. Andy wanted to buy this country's most popular assault rifle, the AR-15.
It looks like a military-style weapon. It's supposed to look intimidating. It's supposed to be scary. It's supposed to put you off guard. This type of marketing makes these types of guns fly off the shelves. It makes them attractive to young people.
The National Rifle Association calls it America's rifle and claims it's often used for hunting. The truth is,
its only use is to kill people. There's no reason to use a semi-automatic gun to kill a deer, for instance.
So how long did it take Andy to buy an AR-15 military-style semi-automatic assault rifle? We'll get back to that. Before we talk about buying a gun in the 21st century, we first need to go back to the 18th century, where guns were
unreliable, they were perishable, they were very unwieldy. Many of them only lasted a year or so. They were prone to rust and rot, water damage of different kinds.
This is Priya Sathya, a professor at Stanford University who studies the history of firearms.
So when the American colonies rebelled against Britain in the 1770s, they could no longer count on getting firearms from the British for obvious reasons. And then after the war is over, it becomes a kind of government priority to invest in firearms manufacturing capacity within the newly independent United States.
So Americans made their own, thanks in part to George Washington's foresight.
George Washington really spearheads this effort to create government-run firearms factories.
Then, in the 19th century,
you see those developing into large capacity factories.
This begins America's long history as a dominant firearms manufacturer. By the time the Civil War has ended, America begins pushing west. And this westward expansion depended on
armed men going out and engaging in wars with Native Americans.
But the proliferation of guns always came with the proliferation of something else, gun control. Because
there's an interest in attracting settlers, so they need to look like safe places to live, not actually a Wild West. So in the 19th century, if you went to, a small town in Kansas or one of these new places opening up in the West, there would be signs greeting you that would say, leave your revolver at police headquarters and you'll get a receipt for that. So people weren't actually walking around in these towns fully armed.
Thank you. That's the point I've been trying to echo forever. Like, you really want this Wild West mentality, but like, I think that's also rooted in like systemic racism, because you view certain people as threatening just because of who they are, and your first thought is shoot them. Like, really?
The mythology of an early American society replete with lax gun laws was a 20th century invention.
And it's an NRA promoted myth. It's also something that shows up in Hollywood movies at the same time. The kind of really loose interpretation that we have of the Second Amendment now is something that you can date from the 1980s onward.
Starting in the 1980s and 90s, developed countries begin responding to rampant gun violence by restricting civilian gun ownership. A 1989 mass shooting in Canada leads to the passing of the Firearms Act 5 years later. In 1987, the Hungerford Massacre in England leads the UK to pass the Firearms Amendment Act. And in 1996, following the Port Arthur Massacre, Australia bans nearly all automatic and semi-automatic weapons. So gun manufacturers focused their attention on the one developed country that was still open for business, the United States.
Because markets everywhere else in the world were either glutted or they had really tight controls on civilian ownership of guns. So it became more and more important for the American civilian market to be open and for Americans to believe that to be American is to own not just one gun, but all the guns you can. So this is something that's being actively promoted by the NRA, which is representing gun manufacturers.
And from there, gun sales grew in the United States.
As a national crime reporter, I write the same story at least once a week, sometimes every day. Often I will be flying back from one shooting only to be turned around and fly to another shooting. This has happened several times in my 7 years here at HuffPost. Gun violence is such an issue that we have a hard time deciding which ones to cover.
Priya, how long do you think it took our colleague Andy to buy an AR-15 in Orlando immediately following the Pulse nightclub shooting?
Zero time? I don't know. How fast was it?
During a state of emergency, I bought an AR-15 in about 38 minutes.
38 minutes? I thought it would be faster.
The only reason it took 38 minutes and not less time is because
There was such a backup of people buying guns.
the irony of mass shootings is that for the gun industry, they're actually good for business.
The only way to keep civilians in America continually engaged in buying ever more guns is by encouraging this fear that they're about to lose the right to buy guns.
Hillary wants to abolish essentially.
Oh, wow.
abolish
Here
the
we
Second
go.
Amendment.
Here we go
A
again.
sort of spate of panic buying.
Their goal is to eliminate the Second Amendment.
Every time there's a mass shooting,
Their goal
That's at
is to
CPAC 2018 talking about they're going to take away your guns. In 2021, we got back to they're going to take away your guns. They have yet to ever take away your guns. Like, that never happened.
eliminate the Second Amendment.
More people own guns now than every single time they say they're going to take away their guns. So I'm confused as to how you, a gun owner, don't recognize the cognitive dissonance of somebody standing up on a stage and telling you, you got to buy guns before they take them away every single time, and then nobody ever does it, and yet you still believe they're going to take away your guns.
every time there's a mass shooting, Americans donate to the NRA
We're here. We're not going anywhere.
and they buy AR-15s en masse.
To stop a bad guy with a gun, it takes a good guy with a gun.
But two people with guns are not separate from one another. So it's the intention of the person with the gun. So if you make it easier for people to buy guns, you make it easier for bad people to buy guns legally, therefore creating the same monster that you keep advocating against. I'm confused.
And in turn, a vicious cycle continues.
As
Or you could
guns
just say it like that.
pervade American society, so do mass shootings. It's why you look at the exits when you go to the theater. It's why, parents are telling their kids how to shelter safely at school. It's why you don't feel safe at a yoga studio anymore.
And perhaps the most devastating part of all,
Now mass shootings have become part of American culture. It's something that goes on that we don't correct. Mass shootings have occurred in other places and then action was immediately taken to prevent it from happening again. The kind of peculiar refusal in America to take that kind of action, that's American, and then the mass shootings themselves are now solidly part of American culture.
Our youth is growing up
America first, baby. We just kill each other because that's what we do.
in an environment where they expect that walking out the door comes with an inherent risk. I heard students saying, "I'm not surprised," as often as they said, "I can't believe this is happening."
Like, we gotta have school shooter drills. Oh, we're mandating school shooter drills. Like, say the word out of your mouth and then say, instead of us worrying about how to stop the guy with the gun from coming into the school, why don't we fix the society that makes the guy think he needs to come into the school with the gun? You would think this would be, as Donald Trump said, common sense. But somehow that sense is not so common.
Information units holding a shot turn.
Each time we see one of these mass shootings, our thoughts and prayers are not enough. It's not enough.
Damn, I didn't even know that. Mass shootings get the most attention, but suicides compromise a majority of gun deaths. Wow. From people not knowing how to handle one. Oh, I'm illegally allowed to buy a gun, and then I get a gun, and I think, damn, I'm not made for this world. Clack, like, or accidents. Oh, it went off and it shot me in the head, and I'm there. I'm like, come on. Wow, Ted Cruz, Republican presidential candidate. He's a gun lover. I wonder, man. That's crazy to me.
You can't understand gun trafficking unless you understand our gun laws. So we asked a local gun enthusiast to show us how he was able to legally purchase guns without a background check from a private seller.
You can really just go online and find so many listings with private sellers. This is a never-ending list. This guy right here really has a full package of everything you need for an AR-15. It's fairly cheap also for what he's selling. 1,400 is really not bad. This guy right here has a Ruger for sale. He's asking for $350. You could probably...
And look at Americans literally disliking anything talking about, oh, guns are legal, so why is the guy's voice being hidden? Because, like, I don't want to be associated with this shit.
Even get that even a little bit cheaper. What's up, man? You all right? How's it going? All right, just being traffic, you know. I hear you, man. Yeah, man. Hey, I'll put it right here if you want. How much are you willing to sell it for? I got it for $350.
Yeah, we talked about it already.
The only reason I got $350 is...
It's crazy that you just mentioned that because the irony was, like, the whole CPAC conference was about how Joe Biden is so left-leaning. Hey, we appreciate the subscription.
Because I usually don't sell a gun unless I buy another gun with the money. Do you have to make sure you're selling to these people that you're giving them background checks and all that stuff? Legally in the state of Georgia, no. No. In the state of Georgia, you really don't have to check anything. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, have a good one. You too.
That man literally didn't do...
I usually don't sell a gun unless I buy another gun with the money. Do you have to make sure you're selling to these people that you're giving them back?
So he could have just sold a gun to a random ass, like, yeah, I'm getting ready to clap up a school. You never check it. You'd never know.
And for years, the most common place for private sales was at the gun show. It is crazy how many guns and how many varieties of guns are at a gun show.
Would you be negotiable on this?
Now, at this show, about 80% of the booths are all licensed, but the other 20% were private sellers.
How much would you let these go for?
I would take, for that one right there, I'd take $250 out the door.
I get that one. Yeah. You guys do background checks or anything like that?
Oh,
okay.
You legal to buy a gun?
Yeah. I got cash and yeah. I'm okay.
Like, yeah, I'm legal. Yeah, I'm legal. Like,
Count out for you.
wow.
It's 260. Good change. Thank you, sir. This is a 380 Beretta, so I got that pretty simple and easy. As long as I had cash, I was good. Well, I could have been a felon for all they know.
Literally.
If you look at all the maps of the Spanish Empire you can find, you will notice that the Spaniards claimed far more land than they actually had, claims that were sometimes outright ridiculous, costly, and completely unenforceable. However, in North America, not only did they claim more than they actually had, but being that they were the first to colonize the American continents, one has to wonder why they failed at enforcing all their claims. Claims that stretched from Alabama to Minnesota to Alaska and even to Hawaii, over a total of what are today 27 US states. Guns and property is the short answer. The Spanish came to the New World to conquer existing societies, build new societies, and mold it all into their global empire. Unlike the Dutch, British, and French, who mainly had financial interests, the Spanish idea of empire had more in common with how the Romans built empires. They wished to export the Spanish way of life, assimilate conquered people into their society, and enforce a Spanish social structure upon their subjects. And part of Spanish colonial life was that the colonials were strictly forbidden from owning firearms. Colonial subjects didn't own firearms or even property, but were mostly day laborers on plantations and mining complexes owned by corporate interests like the Basque Guipuzcoan Trading Company. When Spain came to the New World, it encountered large native kingdoms such as the Aztecs, so Spain brought an army and conquered them. But when the Spaniards encountered nomadic native nations in places like Chile, Texas, Venezuela, and New Mexico, they ran into trouble. You can conquer Tenochtitlan, but how do you conquer a constantly moving group of peoples not dependent on one particular spot of land? The Spaniards encountered the same nomadic warfare that bested the Romans, Russians, and Chinese before them, and since they banned their citizens from owning firearms, the only way a semblance of security could be established was by an expensive military presence. In short, it was only safe to live where the Spanish crown stationed troops. Elsewhere, well, not so much. Caracas was burned down by a native warband when it was garrisoned by the Spanish army. The
Which
Spaniards
they used to justify more and more killing.
fought an almost 300-year-long war with the Apaches, Suma, and Mansu throughout northern Mexico, Texas, Nevada, and New Mexico. And unlike the wars we know from popular culture involving the Americans from much later, the Spaniards lost. Ranches were burnt to the ground, mines destroyed, and entire towns pillaged and burnt. The Spanish army was hopelessly lost in this vast region, perfect for ambushes and hit-and-run attacks. Spanish settlers were barred from owning any firearms or form militias to defend themselves. Whatever expedition pushed further north and to the east didn't fare any better. Spanish expeditions sent to explore and settle Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi just disappeared, and presumably because they were wiped out by the Cherokee. Then, in the 1600s, the Spaniards started executing Pueblo shamans for sorcery and witchcraft. The Pueblo, who were a settled people, rebelled and kicked the Spaniards out of Santa Fe and the Rio Grande Valley, restricting Spanish activity to southern Texas and California from then on. The Spanish colonial social order didn't allow for a successful settling of this area, as it was unequipped to conquer and assimilate nomadic natives or patrol the vast lands. The British had a completely different colonial policy. They explicitly encouraged their colonial subjects to own firearms. More than that, they handed out the land they had taken from the natives to settlers. And that land, aka property, is the reason why most of these settlers came in the first place. Europe was a mess of large landowners, serfdom, high grain taxes, and famines. Political rights, if existent at all, were also tied to how much property a person owned. Having a plot of land that was your own was a prospect irresistible to many, and irresistible to the British Crown was what these settlers would do on that property. Buy slaves, grow cash crops, sell them to British trading companies, and thereby increase the wealth of the empire. And the British also allowed the means of defending that property. The settlers would be personally invested in their colonial property and thereby the colonial economy. The British would profit, not have to spend money on an expensive large standing army, could invest in a large navy to bully others, and the armed colonials would take care of the French, natives, and Spaniards because they weren't just protecting the empire, but their
They
own
were protecting
property.
their
The
own
mistake
property.
the British made in the end was assuming that this colonial strategy wouldn't backfire. The colonial policy of handing out the land and permitting the ownership of guns for settlers is one the British practiced in every colony they settled, which is why all these countries have less constraining laws on private gun ownership to this day, except for those who in modern days introduced gun control laws. The United States, however, is different from the other colonies. Guns and the gun culture that developed became tied to property. The reason one owned a gun was to protect what was yours or what you had taken from others. It became essential to the promise of the country to those who came to it, but also part of its darkest chapters. As much as you may read or hear of the American gun culture as something tied to a violent history, racism, hunting, frontier life, or other, and as much as you might hear debates by legal scholars and politicians theorize the modern and past meanings of the Second Amendment, the truth of the matter is that this country's gun culture developed out of and goes hand in hand with the promise of owning your own property and being permitted to defend what
Correct.
is yours. And that is a powerful drive that is hard to break. German and French gun culture revolved around having guns to kill each other. Polish gun culture revolves around being prepared for invasion. Same with Swiss gun culture. And as Europe increasingly became a more peaceful place, these gun cultures, and with them the ownership of guns, eroded or were drastically changed and reinvented. The United States have barely enacted any regulations to limit ownership of firearms, even when a sizable amount of the population used said firearms in an armed insurrection to keep slavery legal. If the Americans didn't restrict firearms ownership after they were used in an attempt to keep slavery legal, I doubt they will do so now after massacres and increased gun crime. There is, however, one thing that is steadily undermining the United States gun culture and might eventually be its undoing, something that is largely unnoticed in the modern gun debate.
I gotta hear this one.
Ownership of private property is on the decline. And with the American gun culture being so deeply tied to property rights, what is most likely to in the end change the legal landscape on firearms in the United States is the change of American society itself from property owners into indebted, rent-paying day laborers.
Yeah, you won't need guns anymore because you could care less. You could care less. One more. 2 minutes.
In America versus the rest of the world. Okay, first up, let's talk about the total number of guns. So for this, every bullet represents 1 gun per 100 people. So Japan has 0.6 guns, so we'll just fill this bullet up to represent that. The UK has 6.2 guns for every 100 people. Next up, Australia has more than double that with 15 guns. Germany doubles that and has 30.3 guns. Switzerland's got 45.7 guns per 100 people. Then the US, 88.9 guns for every 100 people. So looking at that in another way, if this pile here is the total population of the world, then the US would be about 5% of that. And if this pile of ammo here represents the total amount of guns worldwide, the US has 35 to 50% of every gun in the world. So let's talk about what actually happens with these guns. After the Charleston shootings, President Obama came out and said this.
It's funny because I knew there were going to be detractors, but if you read these comments, literally some 30% of that 500,000 was suicides. Didn't mention that 80% of crime is gang related. After I purchased more guns, I love this started in 1977, blah, 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 this. I moved to, I miss my firearms. If guns kill people, then your pencil is the reason you fail at spelling tests. 50% rookie numbers, we need to get those numbers up. Honestly, if they take our guns, they take everything. Goes from gun homicide to, in other words, excuses. No Switzerland homicide with guns is way less than 26, blah, blah, blah. What about Mexico? Seriously, we got to get these numbers up. Like, sick, like, gun owners are, like, straight sick in the head at this point. Like, there are some really nice people who just happen to own guns, but people who make their identity owning guns, that's crazy. Go ahead, dislike the video, because I know you watched all the 30 fucking minutes of it. Go ahead, dislike the video. Yeah, I'm talking to you, YouTube. Yeah, I know you. I know you paying attention. Go ahead, dislike it. You guys are fucking sick. You literally attach your entire identity to something or a state of affairs that hasn't happened. Just like the last video you just watched that you sat through. You know for a fact that the reason we had so many guns was for a specific reason, as in like the American Revolution, and then you use those same guns to arm an insurrection and secede from a union, and that mass killing of your own country's people was not enough to say, okay, we got to calm down with the guns. So of course not now. You don't want to be woken up and say, oh, owning a gun isn't bad. Why do you hate guns so much? I don't. I think that your entitlement to think that you are not an American if you don't own a gun is leading you into another like casualty case that you aren't even seeing yourself. Like, come on, do better. America need to do better.
At some point, we as a country will have to reckon with the fact that this type of mass violence does not happen in other advanced countries.
So let's look into that. Let's look into mass shootings worldwide. We're going to use the FBI's definition of a mass killing, which is 4 or more random deaths. Since 1997, Japan has had 0 mass shootings. Same with Australia, they've had none. The UK has had 1 event. Germany has had 3. Same with Switzerland, they've had 3 events as well. The United States has had 3 in 2014 alone. Since 1997, the United States has had 51 mass killings. The next stat that we're going to look at is the total firearm homicides in these countries. We're going to use the statistic 1 out of every 10 million. Japan's rate is 1 firearm homicide per 10 million people. The UK's rate is 6. Germany's rate is 7 out of 10 million. Australia's is 13.
Oh God, America's is gonna be like 51 or some shit.
Switzerland has a rate of 26. In the US, 401. Since
I said 50 something and it's 8 times as much.
1997, there have been approximately 540,000 American deaths from firearms. That's more than World War I and World War II combined.
And we're slowly getting to that point with COVID, even if you want to believe that COVID's not real. So good luck with that. Good luck with that. Literally good luck with that. Final talking point. If you are a conservative who believes that your guns are getting taken away, I hate to tell you this, but you're being lied to. The enemy is not the other person. The enemy is you. Sorry.